Hello and welcome to The Lawless Way, a series of talks based on the book called The Lawless Way by Philip J. Bradbury, who happens to be me. Today we're talking about problems. And I'm going to suggest to you that 99%, if not more, of people deal with problems in the wrong way. See, firstly, we all have problems. Everyone has problems. And it's just a matter of degree, isn't it? It's whether, how do we spend our $10th million? Or how do I find a job and feed my family? How do I deal with this pimple on my nose or this cancer scare? Big, small, important, life-threatening, insignificant. We all have problems. The second thing with problems is that they don't go away. Well, they do. We fix one. I fix the pimple on my nose, but then I have one on my cheek. Or I'm unemployed, I find a job, and then I get sacked again, or some other financial problem comes along. Or I have a problem with my marriage, and so we go to counseling, we get that fixed, and then I have a relationship problem with my children. So whatever it is. And usually we have a particular problem that may follow us through our lives. And it may be finance, relationships, career, where to live. Maybe it's constant feeling of depression or some sort of mental thing that just doesn't go away. And so we might deal with whatever these problems are in some way, but they really don't go away. Because if they do go away, they're replaced by another one. So I'm going to suggest to you that we can't get rid of problems. But we keep trying. We keep trying. And we keep pushing against this wall that's not going to fall over. So my suggestion is, instead of trying to make our problems smaller, let's make them bigger. I know that goes against all logic, but I will show you a new logic. See, what we all do, or most of us, is try and get rid of our problems. We either deal with them, or we minimize them, or we avoid them, or we do 1,000 different things to at least make them smaller, make them more manageable. But they don't go away. Or they do go away and their relations turn up, their close relations. Something else happens as soon as this one's fixed. So I'm going to suggest, instead of making our problems smaller, let's make them bigger. Now, I'll tell you a short story. When my son was 11 and 12 age, he used to deliver newspapers to the local people in our area. And sometimes the van delivering the newspapers to the newspaper boys and girls would be late, so they would be late delivering the newspapers. And it was a small community, and we could guarantee if the newspapers got delivered late by my son, we would get 1 or 2 phone calls. People worried about their late newspaper. Now, on a scale of 1 to 100, of all of the problems on the planet, how big is late newspaper? Would it be 1, 2, 3, 100? I don't know. I'm going to submit it's probably less than 2 out of 100 in terms of the big problems in the world and the small ones. Late newspaper. Now, the person who has the problem of late newspaper, this is back to front, on a scale of 1 to 100, how big is their life? Probably the same. If someone has late newspaper as their problem, their life is probably going to be the same size as their problem. So going to the other extreme, someone who sets their problem, if you like, as dealing with the apartheid problem in South Africa, that somewhere in that scale of 1 to 100, that's got to be over 90, I would think. And the person who chose to deal with that, or one of the many, Nelson Mandela, how big was his life? He's going to be remembered I don't know, for how a long time, much longer than my neighbor who had a late newspaper. So Nelson Mandela's problem, this is weird, was large, and his life was large. If we set our problem as dealing with the hunger and the health, if you like, ill health of people, of the millions in Calcutta, how big a problem might that be out of 1 to 100? Somewhere up there. It's probably unsolvable, actually. So it's got to be off the scale. And Mother Theresa, who set herself that problem, how big was her life? Kind of off the scale as well, somewhere around Nelson Mandela's kind of size, I think, of life. So it seems if we think about this logically, the larger the problem we have, the larger our life gets. Now, no one's ever told me about that because I've spent my life trying to make my problems smaller. And therefore, it's made my life smaller. But my problems haven't gone away. So if the only thing that's going to change by making my problems larger is that I get a larger life, where's the downside? Fear. The downside is fear, because when I take on a larger problem, there is kind of like this bigger, fear is the only word I can come. There's this bigger sense of, oh gosh, there's more to this. And it was quite interesting because when I was in South Africa, I did have the chance to speak to Nelson Mandela for a very short time, just a few moments. And I had one question for him, and I said to him, Nelson, does the fear get any bigger? And he looked at me and I said, well, when you started speaking, it was to small groups in your village, townships they call them. And speaking to groups of people can be fearful. He said, well, yes, it was a little, but he was impassioned, but there was fear. I said, so you spoke to 20 people, and then along the way you've spoken to larger and larger groups, and eventually you've spoken to the United Nations, and effectively you've spoken to the world and the South African Parliament and huge rallies, thousands of people. So I said, when you were talking to 20 people, this was the level of fear. When you talk to 200,000 people, was it 100,000 bigger fear? And he said, no. He said, the fear is the same. And we both laughed. And that was our conversation. And he had to go. And it occurs to me that whatever we do, whether it's, I don't know, whether it's proposing marriage to somebody or putting ourselves forward for a job interview or putting ourselves forward for something, it's just fear. The fear is the same. Or whether it's dealing with our cancer scare, or whether it's our arthritis or whatever it is, there is just fear. And fear is just fear. And there may be different levels of fear, but really, if we magnify our life, as Nelson did, from talking to 20 people to talking to millions, his fear didn't rise by a factor of millions. It was just fear. And so when we make our problems bigger, there may be the possibility of now we're leaping into a bigger scenario, a bigger pool, and the possibility that fear could be bigger. But in fact, it's not, because we're just dealing with things on one day at a time. I'll give you an example of Helen, I'll change the name to Helen. She was one of many people who came to my Free to Be Me course. And her initial problem, was that she was fairly recently divorced, had a 6-year-old son, and her husband was being a right bastard, to quote her. He wouldn't turn up to pick him up, or he wouldn't come back on time, and he promised to do this and he promised to do that. He was just being purposely awkward and making life hell for her, because she was juggling work and juggling motherhood and other bits of life as well. And her husband, being a right bastard, to quote her, was just not helping. And she was just absolutely beside herself because apart from herself and just dealing with life, she was very, very, she was worried because it was impacting on her son. He was really upset about the whole thing. And because of the disruption and the angst between his parents, the boy was getting really, really stressed and not doing well at school and so on. So this was her problem. This was how big it was. So I suggested, so that we had a little discussion because people need to vent. And so there was a lot of sort of, yeah, he's a prick and he should do this and he's horrible and da, 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 he's pointing, as we do. And so I let it go for a moment, a little while. Some people got quite heated and it didn't help. It didn't make the problem go away or fix it. So I suggested to Helen, how about making her problem bigger? And no, I've got enough to do. I can't deal with this. I said, no, let's just play with this idea in our minds. How can you make this problem bigger? And she thought about it, and it was just a play. So she kind of softened into it a bit. So what is your problem? Your problem is about you and your husband and your son and to do with child custody. Yeah, that's the problem, I guess. How can you make this bigger? And she thought about it, and suddenly she remembered from a long time ago, she'd always had this dream of being a lawyer. And she said, she suddenly had this crazy, crazy, big, hairy plan of being a lawyer to help deal with custody issues, family custody. And so she thought, oh, wow, that would be amazing. So instead of having her little problem here about me and my custody battle, I can deal with all custody battles in New Zealand and reform the law. And she suddenly popped back into a previous series of dreams, plans, whatever she had, and that got thwarted because she got married and had to put that dream on hold. So anyway, her mission, which I gave her, was to go and do some investigation, find out how to be a lawyer to deal with custody battles and sort out New Zealand's custody laws. Oh, me. There was this burst of, oh, wow, I can do this. She gave her something to look forward to say the least. So the next week, because the course was a weekly course, she came back and a bit depressed. Well, not depressed, upset, disappointed, because she'd done some research and she'd decided that the cost of becoming a lawyer, doing the degree, and the time away from her son, because she had to wanted to look after him, it wasn't worth the cost in terms of time and money and all the rest of it. And so so I said, okay, so you had this little problem, you've gone to a bigger one. Is there something in the middle? And she had to think about this. And I said, don't give up on it, because I said, you've only gone for 0 to 100. Is there somewhere in the middle? So anyway, the third week she came back all enthusiastic. She got a job, because in her investigation into finding out how to be a lawyer, she'd gone into the local courthouse at Mount Maunganui. And she had ended up talking to this chap who ran the courthouse. Not sure what his title was. Who cares? And so the second week she went back to him. This time not looking to be a lawyer, because she wanted to find out from him previously how to be a lawyer and what the process was and how she would interact with the court system and all of that. And so she went back to him and just asked about jobs in the courthouse. And miraculously, he says, I think I need you. He saw her passion. He saw that she was involved in her own custody battle, so she had some experience. And she was an intelligent woman. She had some skills, sort of office-type skills, which were valuable. And he realized she was actually very good at talking with people. And he said, we're actually looking for someone, not a lawyer, but someone to help as an assistant in the custody department here at the courthouse. And she had a job. So she went from one, if you like, her personal problem. She went to 100, which is dealing with all custody battles in New Zealand. And somewhere in the investigation, she ended up becoming an assistant in the courthouse. And then, and I found out later, she ended up becoming in charge of it. So the other strangely magical thing was, it's almost happened immediately. She had the thought of making her problem bigger. Her husband changed. He became nice. He started turning up on time and bringing her son back on time and buying things that he had promised to do and just not being a bastard. And she couldn't quite get her head around this. But what she realized somehow was when she took her focus off her problem kind of not solved itself. It wasn't perfect, but it got better. When she took her mind to a higher plane beyond her current problem somehow got less. Now, she didn't lose problems because she now had a bigger problem of dealing with other people's custodies, and her own one wasn't perfect. But there is something magical about changing our mind to a new level, taking whatever our problem is to another group of people. Now, there's another guy, Brian, in my course. He was a cabinet maker, a woodworker, and he'd become unemployed. He had 2 children, 7 and 9, I think they were. He was married, and he was terrified of not being able to survive financially and all of the rest of it, mortgages and stuff. So he was unemployed, and it was the time that there was a downturn in work. And so his number one level problem was him surviving. And so again, we suggested, how can you make this a bigger problem? Well, he couldn't think of anything. He said, I need to get a job, and then I can maybe help other people. Anyway, I put it to him that there's a possibility that he could do things for other people or make a bigger problem, shall we say, without getting a job in the meantime, say. Anyway, the second week he came back and he had decided he'd something had grabbed him by the collar, nicely, if you like, and he'd gone and talked to some people who he had never met before. He actually went and talked to an accountant, and that accountant put him onto a lawyer, and he decided to set up a trust for unemployed tradespeople. And so that's what he did. And he still had no money. He was on the dole, so that was basic. But through some of these professional people, and they also ended up renting a warehouse property, so he had to deal with property people, and he ended up meeting all sorts of people he would never have met in his life before, all of these professional people, and his world expanded. And then he started contacting, or through the professional people, got a grant from the government, or from the council, and set up this trust. And he was able to get, weirdly, after a time, a salary from this trust. And so instead of looking for a job over here with problem size, whatever it is, 10, he kind of let that problem go and created the possibility of a bigger problem of, how can I help other tradespeople without jobs in my community? So he made his problem bigger, and his life got bigger. And I have no idea what's happened to him, but I know that a year later, He was he actually was helping other groups in other towns around the country set up trusts to help unemployed tradespeople and giving them other skills, management skills, and also trade skills, but also kind of management non-trade skills to give them the possibility of setting up their own business rather than being employees. So he became a kind of a mentor in helping other trusts set themselves up. His life got bigger. So that is the challenge for today. How can our life get bigger? Because knowing that problems will not go away, or they will go away, but a new one will turn up, a fairly closely related problem will turn up if we deal with one. So instead of doing that, let's just make whatever it is our abiding problem, whatever it is, make it bigger. And of course, I have to do my own homework. So I'm looking in the mirror here and I'm thinking, what is my problem? My problem is that I rile against the lack of freedom and the insanity of the non-reasons behind the fact that I have non-freedom. So that's my Philip Bradbury problem. So how can I make that a bigger problem? And so how can I help people find more freedom? And of course, freedom doesn't come from without. It comes from within. People in jail can feel free, strangely. Anyway, so that is, I'm playing with my problem. And I suggest to you, think about how can whatever your problem is, how can you make it bigger? Knowing that the fear will not get bigger. The problem will get bigger and your life will get bigger. That is the mathematical formula. So let me know how you're going. I've got a website you can call me on. You can contact me. I've got emails and Facebooks and MeWe and all of that sort of stuff. So let me know what your big problem is that you've chosen to go to and what the result is. And let's just have some fun. So thank you for listening and bless you all.